Good afternoon. You're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Jess Delos Santos. Let's take a look at how the local bourse closed today, Wednesday. Okay, gloomy day here in Luzon as Jolina continues to pummel parts of the island. But sentiment in today's session not dim at all. Philippine stocks climbed 0.5% for a second day, now at 6,949. That's despite flip-flopping decisions from the government. It deferred placing the capital under looser restrictions and targeted lockdowns until September 15, meaning its status quo MECQ will be maintained for Metro Manila. But foreign investors seem to be taking cues. For the first time in 4 sessions, they dumped local stocks with net sales at 49.6 million pesos. Same goes for some local stocks, with a number of the day's losers expected to take a hit from that move by the government. The country's largest casino operator, Bloomberry, dragged the most with a 4.2% slump. McDonald's operator Alliance Global also sliding by 3.4%. Same goes for food manufacturer URC, which ended the day lower by 0.5%. But on the other spectrum here, one of the big gainers is San Miguel. It's after reports that it inked a water supply deal with 7 districts in Bulacan. Add to that a debt sale for its energy unit, SMC Global Power, which may be priced Wednesday to raise funds for investments in a Batangas facility. The conglomerate, as you can see in this chart right here, ending the day in the green, up close to 3.1%, now at 117 pesos and 50 centavos a share. Here are other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. Severe tropical storm Jolina continues to batter several provinces in Luzon, particularly Batangas. As of 2 p.m., Typhoon Jolina was spotted in the vicinity of San Nicolas, Batangas. Signal number 2 is raised in Metro Manila, Calabarzon, and several other provinces in Central Luzon and parts of Mimaropa. Several power transmission lines are also affected by Jolina. The National Grid Corporation of the Philippines says power disruptions are possible due to the current weather disturbance. Severe tropical storm Jolina is being joined by Typhoon Kiko, which is packing heavy winds and expected to bring heavy rain over the eastern section of northern Luzon by Friday. Finance Secretary Sonny Dominguez is calling on the Senate to prioritize the Duterte administration's remaining economic reform measures. He says doing so will push guaranteed strong economic rebound amid the pandemic. To be specific, Dominguez is pushing for the passage of amendment bills to the Foreign Investments Act and the Public Services Act to enable more foreign direct investments. The Finance Department is also banking on the passage of the remaining tax reform packages. Dominguez expects a budget deficit to narrow down further starting next year on the back of higher collections, but he insists the government must continue fiscal prudence until such time. Now, the Interior Department, meanwhile, defends the abrupt changes made last night over community restrictions in Metro Manila. Interior Undersecretary Jonathan Malaya says the IATF decided to keep a status quo pending final guideline decisions on the Granular Lockdown. National Task Force spokesperson Restituto Padilla also admitted on the chiefs that the guidelines were still under discussion with concerned local leaders. He says health workers were also making their own appeal to postpone its implementation. The DILG expects the final guidelines to be out in 2 to 3 days' time. As government flip-flops and its quarantine curb decision, social media went abuzz with businesses telling tales of how they have prepared for a looser GCQ only to be surprised with a last-minute decision by government to maintain MECQ. How is this decision going to affect the already heavily battered private sector? Let's find out from the private sector representative to the Legislative Executive Development Advisory Council, or LEDAC, Sir George Barcelon. He's also the chairman of the Philippine Exporters Confederation. Good afternoon, Sir George.
Good afternoon, Jester.
Okay, so how did you and the rest of the private stakeholders take that last minute withdrawal from government last night? How much did that overnight decision cost the sector?
Well, frankly speaking, the sudden backtracking to MECQ really doesn't reflect well on the part of the authorities. Uh, this has heightened the mistrust of private sectors on government's handling of the situation. Some sectors were already in the process of preparation, calling in their workers and buying their supplies, and they're quite disappointed. We were hoping that after the 2 week ECQ and the almost 2 weeks MECQ, the government should have used that time to vet out, how we can proceed with the heightened GCQ. Uh, you know, they could have waited until they've worked it out and announced it. Yung biglaan at saka babawin nila doesn't really look well, no, from the private sector's point of view. As far as exporters, must badly affected during the ECQ. But we had the MECQ, so that was better.
Mhm.
In other words, the supply chain was not as badly affected as ECQ. But
Mhm.
nevertheless, this uncertainty on the government's policy, no, heightens the mistrust, no, and the competency of the government. That's what I can say. It's sad, but we look forward, as I've been hearing, that the government now and they are in collaborations with the different agencies and how to move on. So we are waiting and see what would the policies be for us to continue our businesses. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, now, Sir George, you yourself said that so much uncertainty here when it comes to how the government decides on their next policy move. How is that going to affect a sector which is in dire need of stability here? And how does that also affect the country as an investment location?
Well, in the key point that really for business men is predictability and certainty. Earlier, you mentioned what Secretary Sonny Dominguez said about how the country will move forward.
Mhm.
And yes, we have been trying to use fiscalization, incentivizing, investors. But again, those will have to. All of that must be taken into consideration on how do we deal with our COVID-19 pandemic. You can have all the incentives there, but if the government has no clear plan on mitigating areas that of concern, it's like tracing, for example.
Mhm.
We have for the longest time been airing this to the authorities that there's hardly any tracing effect on mitigating, especially now with the higher trajectory of 20K a day. So those are all key issues that it's the responsibility of the government. The private sector has been very disciplined and has really encouraged our workers to be vaccinated. We're glad to know that there are more vaccines coming in that will be made available. But
Mhm.
aside from that, the mobility is still an issue, okay, for the workers to commute to their working place.
Mhm.
There has been a lot of talk about the vacuna bubble, but we would address it from the point of view. Ang pinaka-basic is how do you get the commuters? No, you can have all these guidelines, but having people vaccinated, not vaccinated. But how do you get people from point A to point B to their working areas? So
Mhm.
we still stress that the mobility issue has to be addressed first. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, we'll get to that later. But for now, let's focus here on the MECQ at least being in place for another week. How much of an economic impact are you looking at due to that move?
Uh, the report from NEDA, from Secretary Carl, during the time of ECQ,
Mm-hmm.
the impact was estimated to be about 150 billion pesos. Uh, with MECQ, the estimate was half of it. billion. So that is still very substantial. And seeing what, like this pulling back from GCQ all of a sudden, again, now people are scratching their head. What would come next? Okay, and it affects the whole sentiment of businessmen as far as preparing, getting their workers to report, preparing their supply chain, and this again we might be inching more like 100 billion a week impact
Mhm.
on the economy.
Mhm. Okay, now, Sir George, the government has admitted they have yet to come up with or at least they have yet to iron guidelines on how they are going to go through with this granular lockdowns. What do you like to see there to somehow provide more room for businesses?
Uh, well, uh, what we hear is really especially the MSMEs, they're really badly affected, and they form part of the supply chain, especially in the food or restaurant business. The malls are closed. They can only have limited seatings, and that really affects the small guys. Okay? And the granular approach, as has been discussed in many forums, I think it's it really means more collaboration.
Mhm.
Even the private sector, they are smart enough, or they are concerned enough for their workers and also their clients. Uh, they don't want them to be, unnecessarily infected. But since they are on the ground, they have better visibility, and
Mhm.
it would be if you leave it up to them. I think they are responsible enough, both the local government and the private sectors in those areas. So
Mhm.
granularity is the only way, wherein it has been proven by studies abroad and the other more developed countries that lockdown is a loss-loss uh, situation for any country who follows it to mitigate COVID. Granularity and more collaboration is one.
Okay.
Earlier, we touched on contact tracing, and I'd like to stress again, um, yes, this has been done. And the other side of it is the government should really project that there are ways of really building, or for the treatment side. There are more uh, medicines available. There are immunity booster.
Mhm.
That should be promoted by the government.
But if we can be more specific, Sir George, is there any particular measure or protocol that you want implemented on the ground to somehow provide more leeway for businesses, for the private sector, as we move to more targeted lockdowns?
Well, earlier we talked about the mobility.
Mm,
Okay, they should field in more public transportation.
okay.
Okay, and in that sense that uh, those are ways wherein the private sector can come in. Let's say some companies have been chartering the their people to work. I myself, in my operations, I spend about half a million a month
Mhm.
chartering buses to bring our
Wow.
employees. And then you know why it's so expensive? Because even the charter bus, you have to
Mhm.
practice protocol. You're only sitting about 30% seating capacity. Okay.
That's,
Now that being said, in the public transportation, it has to be the same thing. But there should be a way where if our workers report to work and we would find out that they are infected, we will report it to DOH.
mhm.
Okay, and DOH must have a way of tracing. Okay, uh, of tracing. Who were in the same vehicle, or there must be, because otherwise, if the mobility issue is not resolved,
Mhm.
we're stuck there. I mean, the economy would be practically at a snail pace, no? So
That's
that's
right.
one area, and the financial assistance to the
Mhm.
MSMEs is quite important. We have, in the last ECQ, the government gave only 1,000 per person.
Mhm.
I'm very frank about it because yes, I know the government is tied up as far as uh, financially. They have also their collection is less, but they have to think about what is necessary
Mhm.
for people to have at least not go hungry for the day, and at the same time that also impacts on the economy. I mean, you got to have
Mhm.
money in people's hand for them not to splurge, no, but to pay for necessities.
Mhm.
And this is
Okay.
what but look at if they go further with MCQ, even at this time, even with the MECQ, they should really give further ayuda.
Mhm. Now, lastly, Sir George, and very quickly now, as part of the export sector, by how much do you see granular lockdowns ramping up production and in turn beefing up export revenues?
I would think there. I cannot give you an exact figure, but definitely I would think probably increase by what they expect to target. It will not be so badly affected.
Mhm.
The projections of DICT for year 2020-21 is about 15 to 20% less than 2020. Uh, of course, there are other factors affecting this. First of all, is the shortage. Our biggest export is electronic. There's a
Mhm.
shortage of component. That is why the export has been affected. And the other issues is the congestion,
Mhm.
the lack of cargo vessel
Mhm.
for shipping out. This issues has been around for almost the better part of 2021.
Mhm.
So we hope. I mean, we're just hoping that things will be better in the component side, in the supply side, and also in the shipping side.
Okay.
And hopefully that we will not be too far off in our exports compared to 2020.
Okay, again, the hope is that as we move to more targeted lockdowns, that somehow the export sector would also revive production output. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Justin.
Private
Yeah,
sector representative of LEDAC, Sir George Barcelon. Thank you, sir.
thank you.
And those are the biggest stories of this trading day, September 8, 2021. Catch Business World Live again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. for the market open and 3:15 p.m. for the market close. I'm Jess Delos Santos, and we are One News. Mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines.